Dealing with the strong man, part 3. The devil's indirect attack and satanic subversion. The Bible tells us that the indirect approach of the devil comes largely through two means, the world and the flesh. We often hear it said that the enemies of the Christian are the world, the flesh and the devil, as though these were three equally powerful enemies. But there are not three. There is only one enemy, the devil, as Paul tells us in Ephesians 6. And our enemy, the devil, uses these two means, the world and the flesh, to make his indirect attack against us. Earlier in Ephesians, Paul addressed these words to Christians and believers, including you and me. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, the first channel, and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, a description of the devil, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient, Ephesians 2:1-2. In other words, Paul is telling us, do not forget your Christians, your followers, your believers, that you too once followed the course of this world. You were under the grip and in control of the ruler of the power of the air, the evil spirit who continues to be at work in the non-Christians all around the world. Paul goes on to tell us in the next verse, all of us who lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature, or the flesh in the King James Version, the devil's second channel, and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature objects of wrath, Ephesians 2:3. The most basic of these two channels is the flesh, our sinful nature. When the Bible uses the term the flesh, it does so in a symbolic sense. Many of us, when we approach middle age, are troubled with too much flesh, but that is not the sense in which the Bible uses the term. The flesh in this context is not our bodies, not the meat and blood and bones of our physical life. It is a term that describes the urge to self-centeredness within us, the distortion of human nature which makes us want to be our own God, the proud ego, the uncrucified self that is the seat of willful defiance and rebellion against authority. We are all born with this sinful nature. None of us had to go to school to learn how to sin and be self-centered. Who taught us to lie? Who taught us to be proud and bitter and rebellious and defiant and self-centered? We never had to take classes in these. We're all experts in how to sin by the time we are ready to go to school. We are all born with the flesh, and it is the presence of this sinful nature that makes us sinners. James calls this the wisdom which is from beneath, which is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. James 3:15. It is the devil attacking indirectly through the essential sinful character of our human nature. Paul says in Romans, as J.B. Phillip translated, everyone has sinned. Everyone falls short of the beauty of Yahuwah's plan in Romans 3:23. The world, on the other hand, is the corporate expression of all the flesh-centered individuals who make up the human race. Since the flesh is in every human being acting in a way that is satanic, sensual, and earthly, the total combined expression of such beings constitute the world and determines the philosophy of the world. It is the tremendous pressure of the majority upon the minority to conform, adjust, keep in step, and go along with the crowd. When the Bible addresses itself to Christians or believers, it says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, as mentioned in Romans 12:2. In other words, do not let the world squeeze you into its mold. Why? Because the world is flesh-centered, flesh-governed, and as Yahushua said to Nicodemus, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to the spirit, as mentioned in John 3:6. In order to be changed, people must be born of the Spirit. So this is the world, that human society which insists on satanic value, just judgments, and is guided by satanic pride and philosophy. While the world is totally unaware of it, nevertheless it is under the control of satanic philosophy. We must never forget the ultimate goal of these clever strategies. The devil seeks to destroy, ruin, and make waste. This is his purpose toward you and me. And you can probably think of it of people who were once full of promising potential, who have given the devil some toehold in their lives, and the devil has used it to destroy their lives. Perhaps they got involved in some habit they took over their lives, such as drugs or promiscuous sex or pornography. or perhaps they have ruined their family by their habitual rage of destruction or destructive tongue. Or perhaps they have turned aside from the truth of Yahuwah in order to chase some worldly philosophy or wealth or prestige or self-centered ideal of fulfillment. It is a story that has repeated again and again and again. And in life after tragic life, Satan schemed to destroy a life Yahuwah loves. And in the particular life, Satan wins because the individual was not aware of the schemes of the devil. So we have been called to a battle against a vicious, scheming, unseen enemy. And we are called to battle not only for our own sake, not only for our own families, but for the sake of others around us. We must warn those around us that life is a battle and that the enemy has us in his crosshairs. And we must warn one another to be aware of the devil's schemes so that we can be armed and defended against the devil's attacks. As we must pray for one another because our only true defender is Yahushua himself, our Messiah. Battling against these forces of darkness is what makes human life possible on the earth. If Christians or believers who are the salt of the earth, we were not devoted to an intense intellect battle against Satan and satanic forces, if we as believers did not choose to be strong in Yahuwah and in the power of his might, then human life could not exist on this planet. The forces of evil would run rampant and unopposed throughout human society, and life on earth would be a horrible, unendurable hell. It is the presence of believers or Christians and the Holy Spirit, Yahuwah's Ruach, who lives within us, and the gospel that we bring that makes the world as livable and bearable as it is even for non-believers or non-Christians. So we have an erroneous or enormous responsibility before Yahuwah and before the entire world to give ourselves, body and soul, to this great battle against the schemes of the evil one. We have a responsibility to battle the schemes of the devil in the world and to point the way to the peace and security that lies ahead of us in the world to come. So let's say this prayer before we get into chapter 4 or verse 4 or group 4, the tactics of terror. And the prayer goes, thank you, Abba Yahuwah, that the victory is already won. Thank you for revealing to me the strategy of my enemy and for the assurance that I have already been brought out of darkness and into the kingdom of your light. I am no longer fight alone in a losing battle in my own fading strength. Instead, filled with your strength and courage, Yahuwah, I fight knowing that the battle has already been won upon the cross of Yahushua Mashiach. Thank you, Yahuwah, for that victory. In the name of Mashiach Yahushua, my victorious commander. Amen. Now we're going to go get into section 4, the tactics of terror. Finally, be strong in Yahuwah and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of Yahuwah so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of Yahuwah so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand. Ephesians 6:10-13. I once heard of a mental hospital that had devised an unusual test to determine when patients were ready to go back into the world. They brought candidates for release into the room where a tap was turned on, sending water pouring out over the floor. Next, they handed the patient a mop and told him to mop up the water. If the patient had a firm enough grasp of reality to turn off the tap before mopping up the water, he was ready to go out into society. But if he had started mopping up the water without turning off the tap, then they knew that more treatment was needed. While you and I would never miss such an obvious step as shutting off the tap before mopping the floor, the fact is that many believers, many Christians, live their lives in a way that is, from a spiritual point of view, equally absurd. Each of us as believers have been given the mop of Yahuwah truth, and we have been told to use it to help mop up the evil in the world around us. But we can only be useful in mopping up the evil around us if we first have enough sense to shut off the flow of evil that pours into our own hearts from the world rulers of this present darkness. That is exactly what the Apostle Paul urges in Ephesians 6:10-13. We can be of no possible help in solving the moral, social, and spiritual problems of the world as long as we remain part of the problem. This whole passage is designed to awaken us and call our attention to the need for understanding the nature of our problem. As we have seen, it is through the channels that the Bible calls the world and the flesh that the devil makes his indirect and most insidious attack upon human life. The world in human society alone will, with its prevailing false values, a morality and immorality, godlessness and atheism, atheism and hedonism and paganism, new ageism, and other deceptive ideas of isms. The world brutally demands our conformity to its false values and ideas and mercilessly punish those who refuse to conform. That is why, down through the centuries and right into the present day, the world has practiced persecution and intimidation against believers or Christians, because when believers or Christians truly practice their faith and preach the gospel, the world and its false values stand exposed and condemned. The flesh is that urge within us toward total autonomy and rebellion, toward being our own little gods, accountable to no one, responsible to no one, obeying no one, respecting no one, and running our own little worlds to suit ourselves. It is that continued tug of self-centeredness and selfishness within each of us that keep us from obeying completely Yahweh. As you can clearly see, this struggle against the influence of the world and the flesh, it is not something merely theoretical or remote from our experience. It is a battle in which we are all engaged every moment of our lives, because the world, the outer arena of battle, is always around us, while the flesh, the inner arena of battle, is always within us. We cannot escape the world, nor can we run away from the flesh. We must always begin our battle right at the point where we are. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was a commissioned naval officer during World War II. In August 1943, the patrol torpedo boat he commanded, PT-109, was rammed and sunk by an enemy destroyer near the Japanese-held Solomon Islands. Kennedy and a fellow officer swarmed from one enemy-occupied island to the next until they found some friendly islanders who helped them get a message to the U.S. forces. Years later, Kennedy was regarded as a war hero. His response: "It was involuntary. They sank my boat." So it is with us. We don't have to volunteer to find ourselves in the middle of war. It's involuntary. The war has already come to us. It is a raging all around us through the channel of the world, and is raging within us through the channel of the flesh. You might be thinking that doesn't seem right at all. I thought that when you became a believer in Yahushua would set you free from the kingdom of Satan so that the devil could no longer touch you. I thought the conversion would take you out of the battle, not thrust you deeper into the conflict. If that is your concept of the believer or Christian life, you couldn't be more wrong. When you become a Christian, that's when the battle really begins. Miserable believers or miserable Christians. Certainly it is true that the devil can never totally defeat a believer. Those who are genuinely of Yahuwah, who have come into a saving relationship with Messiah Yahushua, have been delivered from total defeat. The devil can never get us back into the position of unconscious control he wants to exercise over us, as he does over the rest of the world. But the devil can demoralize the believer. He can frighten us and make us miserable. He can blunt our effectiveness and make us feel weak and unfruitful for Yahuwah. Even though we are ultimately victorious through Mashiach Yahushua, it is at times possible to be more miserable as a believer than you ever were before. The devil has a special reason for wanting to make believers feel defeated, because a demoralized believer is a believer whose effectiveness has been diminished. The unredeemed worldling are no problem to him. They are already in his grasp. Let them try to solve the problems of their lives in the world through legislation, education, and a change of environment. None of that bothers the devil in the least. He is quite content to let them go on rearranging the pieces of the puzzle without ever solving it. But the presence of every believer or Christian in the world bothers the devil greatly. Why? Because each believer is a potential threat to the solidity of the devil's kingdom, to his rule over the rest of mankind, and that is why the devil focuses special attention on us and seeks to hinder and discourage us. But it ain't happening here. When a believer or Israelite of Yahuwah lives in obedience to the will of Yahuwah, he threatens Satan's rule on earth. Every effective believer or Christian in Yahushua is a potential door of escape, helping worldlings to move out of the devil's realm of darkness and into the Yahuwah's realm of eternal light and life. Every believer or Christian who believes in Yahuwah and Yahushua, who lives a life that is yielded to Yahuwah and resistant to the schemes of the devil, is a corridor of liberty, a center of life, dispelling one more patch of darkness and ignorance from the world around him. The devil cannot allow people to escape from his dominion, so he is especially vicious and persistent in his attacks upon believers. He marshals all his forces against us in order to discourage and dishearten us, so that we will not be effective and useful to Yahuwah. Sometimes the devil attacks us as a roaring lion, clawing at us through catastrophic circumstances in order to knock us off our feet and keep us from standing for Yahuwah. At other times he comes as an angel of light, a seductive and alluring temptation, offering us some attractive lure that seems so right, yet which has a deadly poisonous trap hidden within. To be sure, Satan will assume direct control of a human life whenever he can producing an Adolf Hitler or a Charles Manson demonic men, motivated by strange and unexplainable passions. Sometimes the devil assails us through the world with an intimidating pressure to conform, to not be different, to go with the flow, lest we be ostracized and thought of as fanatics or religious extremists. But most often the devil comes in disguise through the channel of the flesh, our inner selves, with silken, subtle, suggestive schemes. That is the avenue of satanic attack. The Apostle Paul warns us more strenuously about the subtle schemes of the devil. The original extremist. According to the Bible, the flesh is, or in this symbolic sense, is identified with the body that ultimately dies. Paul says, but if Christ or Mashiach Yahushua is in you, your body is dead because of sin, yet your spirit is alive because of righteousness. Romans 8:10. Notice that Paul doesn't say your body is growing old and dying, as we would say. No, he says that the body is already dead. He looks to the end of our physical lives and say that it is as good as dead already. In this temporary state we live in prior to our resurrection, the body is the seat of sin, or the flesh, this evil principle of self-centeredness within each of us. Therefore, the flesh is going to be with us for life. We may as well face that. We are never going to get away from it. We shall never escape it until the wonderful day of the resurrection from the dead. But the body, soul, and the spirit of man are inextricable tied together. No one can understand this. Where does your soul live in your body? Do you know? No. But you know that you have a soul. Even though no one can locate it in the body, the relationship between the body, soul, and spirit is beyond our comprehension. But because they are so inextricably tied together, the flesh linked to the body touches the whole person. This is an important concept to understand. This means that the devil can influence us in the body, in the soul, and in the spirit. He has access to the whole person through the channel of the flesh. But another way, we are subject to the influences of these world rulers of this present darkness through our mind, our feelings, and our actions, through our intelligence and our emotions, and our will. We need to see how this works. Through the channel of the mind, the intellect, the devil makes his appeal to human pride. Through the channel of the emotions, the devil works on human fears and passions. In the realm of our actions, our behavior, the things we choose to do and say, the devil makes his appeal to pleasure, since we are essentially sensuous beings. See how accurately this concept is illustrated by the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden? We are told that when she saw the fruit was good for food, it offered the pleasant sensation of eating, the appeal to the body, and it was a delight to the eyes, awakening within her a sense of beauty, the appeal to the emotions. And when she saw that it was desired to make one wise, the appeal to the pride of mind, the appeal to the intelligence, and the love of wisdom and knowledge, she took it and ate. These are simply the channels by which human beings are moved, whether for good or for ill. This is the way men and women are. Both YHUH and the devil appeals to us and seek to move us through these channels: the emotion, the heart, the mind, the intellect, or the intelligence, and the will, the power to choose. You may say, if the devil and YHUH both move us by the same channels, what is the difference? The difference is simple this: the devil moves to create an imbalance and eccentricity. The devil is the original extremist. YHUH moves, however, toward balance, harmony, and beauty. The difference is not how they work, but the direction in which they move. A sanity of balance. The greatest of the gospel is in its appeal to the entirety of humanity, to our whole being, body, soul, and spirit, and to the whole of life. It is this fact that reveals the divine origin of the gospel so clearly. The gospel of Mashiach Yahushua Yeshaya touches and explains all of history. It has a clear and consistent worldview, and it proves or provides a framework for every science, every endeavor to investigate reality, and every effort to understand and make sense of all the events of history. The gospel is not content simply to treat the symptoms of the human condition. It offers a radical solution to our fundamental problem. We often come to Mashiach Yahushua, some call Christ, asking him to resolve some immediate difficulty in which we find ourselves, like a man with cancer going to a doctor and saying, I have a rash on my arm, or yes, I do have cancer, but don't bother with it. Just treat the rash and I'll be on my way. No doctor worthy of his medical degree would honor such a request, and neither does the great physician Messiah Yahushua. YHUH does not simply treat our symptoms and stop there. He knows us better than that ourselves, and he knows that if he merely solves this small problem here or that difficulty there, he has only touched the surface of our lives. The rest of our lives, the core of our lives, will remain diseased and dying. So in his gospel, Yahushua makes his appeal and applies his power to the wholeness of our humanity and to the wholeness of our lives. His goal is to confront the eccentricity and imbalance that sin and the devil produce in our lives, and to bring us into a sanity of balance. Hallelujah. You can see this wonderful sanity in the life of our King. Read the gospel accounts and you are instantly impressed by the marvelous balance in the personality of Yahushua, and by the perfect poise he exhibits in every circumstance. His words challenge and conform the greatest thinkers of his time, and they listen to him with astonishment at his insight and wisdom. No man ever spoke like this man. In their awe response, and of course they are exactly right. There never was another man like Messiah Yahushua. But Yahushua is not all intellect, making his appeal to the philosopher and thinker alone. As you read in the gospel account, you see that he is always warmly human, a man with an unmatched depth of compassion and human concern. He laughs, he weeps, he touches, lives, he awakens the emotions and wonder of those around him. He attracts people to himself. He displays a supernatural magnetism and warmth. He is not content merely to feel certain emotions, nor to merely communicate great truths. Rather, the beautiful balance of his personality is to express in his practical deeds, in his actions, and in the unforgettable, undeniable event like the healing, the raising of the dead, the confrontation of evil and hypocrisy, and the sacrifice upon the cross, and the resounding miracle of the resurrection. What's more, this wonderful sanity of balance that we see in the personality of our King and Messiah Yahushua is also evidenced throughout the Bible. In every book, on every page of Scripture, we see that the whole man is ministered to. The needs of the soul, of the body, and the spirit are kept in a delicate equilibrium with nothing out of balance. Everything is in harmony. The mind, the heart, and the will are all moved together. When YHUH gets hold of a human life, he touches every part of that life, everything less in an incomplete message, a mere fragment. I am indebted to Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones for pointing out that this is sanity of balance is beautifully expressed in one of the great hymns of our faith, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross by Isaac Watts. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died. Notice the depth of meaning in these words. My mind is engaged when I think about the tree or the cross, when I give intellect or intelligent consideration to what it means. When I think of all that was involved in that supreme hour when Yahushua hung between heaven and earth. The cross captures the human dimension of the intellect. And then another dimension of our humanity is touched by the next few lines of the hymn. My richest gain I count but loss, and I pour contempt on all my pride. My emotions are engaged when I think about the cross or the tree. I am moved to both grief and joy when I think of what the cross or the tree cost YHUH, and how the cross or the tree has enriched and rescued me. Anyone who can talk about the cross or the tree, the Messiah Yahushua, without being emotionally moved has not really understood the truth. The truth of the cross is designed to reach the heart, to move us and involve us at the level of our feelings. And this hymn goes on to probe our emotion response to cross, to Messiah, or some that call Christ, Yahushua, and the cross in the next lines. Where the whole realm of nature, mind, that were a present for too small, here compressed into an economy of words is a sense of the grandeur of the work of the cross or the tree, the extent of it and the glory of it. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Love does what? It demands. My will is engaged when I think about the cross or the tree. In the words of this hymn, I find it a compelling call to action. In his baptized imagination and poetic soul, Isaac Watts understood that the appeal of the gospel is to the entire span of our humanity in all of our human dimensions. The whole human being, mind, emotion, and will is totally engaged by the cross or the tree of Messiah Yahushua, Yeshua. That is how YHUH works. He is true, he is balanced, and he calls each of us to this same sanity of balance. Grodeker caricatures. Now let's contrast the wonderful balance of YHUH with the actions of the devil. What does the devil try to produce in our lives? He tries to create imbalance. He works over time to enlarge one element of human nature at the expense of the others. He pushes us toward extreme and tries to turn us into people who are characterized by only one thing. Instead of the whole balanced person, we are caricatures of what YHUH created us to be. Caricatures. There are many who actually take pride in emphasizing one part of their being above everything else. There are the intellectuals, there are the intellectuals, we call them eggheads or brains. They say there is nothing important in life but the mind, the ability to reason, and they give themselves over completely to the development of that one area of life. As a result, they are so absent-minded, so impractical, so emotionless and arid in their personalities that we can hardly live with them because they are out of balance, and we call them eccentric. Then there are the emotional people, those who say, oh, don't talk to me about intellectual things or practical matters. I'm a free spirit. I want to experience life. I want to feel. These people are always living in their momentarily emotions. They are led about by their feelings. They do not make careful, thoughtful decisions based on biblical principles or fact of information. They simply do whatever feels good or feels right at the moment, and as a result, they create enormous chaos for themselves and the people around them. The world has become increasingly filled with people who believe that feelings are under the matter, or feelings are all that matter. Rarely anymore do you hear people say, what do you think about this or that? Usually people today ask, how do you feel about it? Some feelings-oriented people are given to intense, obsessive self-examination. They marinate themselves in their own emotion and or narcissistically introspective, endlessly examining themselves. Of course, there is nothing wrong with self-examination kept in balance with the focus of Yahuwah and on others. A certain amount of inward focus is very much a part of the believer's life, or the Christian life of Yahuwah in Yahushua, our Messiah. But some people never look anywhere but within. They are constantly looking at themselves, examining themselves, thinking about themselves, over-dramatizing themselves, talking about themselves, psychoanalyzing themselves, obsessing over themselves. As a result, they are so self-absorbed, egocentric, and emotional that we can hardly stand to be around them. Then, of course, there are those who say, I have no patience with intellectualism or emotionalism. I believe in being practical. I believe in action. We call such people hard-headed, paganistic, or doers. They are concerned only with these accomplishment, actions, and results. They don't ask, what do you think? They don't ask, how do you feel? They ask, what do you do? They ask, what have you accomplished? They ask, what's the practical use or benefit of this? These are three personality extremes: the intellectual, the emotionalist, and the pragmatic. All three of these extremes are wrong. They are unbalanced. Yahuwah did not create human beings to be extremists. He created us to be balanced, to exhibit a rich and well integrated blend of human intellect, emotion, and will. It is not Yahuwah who produces these extremes in us, but the devil. The devil takes each of these facets of humanity, which Yahuwah designed to be used as human assets and strengths, and he prods us toward an unhealthy imbalance and eccentricity. Take the realm of the mind, for instance. One of the schemes of the devil is to tempt people to exalt reason to the exclusion of faith. Faith is a function of the will of the soul. That is why faith is the most human characteristic of humanity. It is that element of our humanity which is our basic motivator. That is why everyone can exercise faith. You are not human. You are not even alive if you cannot exercise faith. But the devil tries to move from a balance in this area by appealing to our pride. We love to think of ourselves as rational, intellectual beings who have a logical reason for all our ideas, beliefs, and actions. But this exaltation of reason opens the door to error and arrogant self-deception. We delude ourselves into thinking that we are motivated by logic, when in fact we are generally motivated by emotions, desires, and dimly understood drives. Then we use our intellect to come up with pseudo-logical, self-deceptive rationales to justify our illogical emotion decisions. One of the great examples of this, which we often hear these days in the worldly teachings, that the Bible is a primitive book for a primitive age, the biblical truth and morality are irrelevant in today's world. That all truly enlightened, educated, modern, or even postmodern people know that the Bible is just a collection of outdated stories, fanciful myths, and out-of-date moral concepts. Secure in our intellectual smugness, we know that the Bible cannot be believed as a historical record nor relied upon as a moral guide. Not only are we free to ignore biblical truth, but we don't need to believe in any concept of truth. We are free to invent our own reality or our own truth, our own morality, our own worldview without some deity looking over our shoulder, telling us what is right or wrong. The same people who tell us that the Bible is no longer relevant and trustworthy never stop to ponder the fact that the further our society moves away from the teaching of Scripture, the more debased, corrupt, and cruel humanity becomes. As the world has moved away from belief in Yahuwah and the Bible, we have seen a corresponding rise in crime, political corruption, teen pregnancies, teen suicide, divorce, fatherless children, disrespect for marriage, single-parent families, abortion, pornography, drug abuse, alcoholism, racism, plus a general decline in personal integrity, responsibility, decency, and civility. The worse the world gets, the more people apply the solutions that created the problem in the first place, and that is why there is a spiraling upward of social ills and a spiraling downward of morality and decency in the world. There is an active effort in our society today to erase the image of Yahuwah as a loving Heavenly Father. It began as an effort to devalue Yahuwah, his image, by picturing him disrespectfully as the old man in the sky or the man upstairs. It has gone so far today that even many churches and denominations now picture Yahuwah not as a father but as a political correct and hence biblically incorrect, gender neutral heavenly parent, or even a heavenly mother or pseudo goddess. The gender politics of the radical feminist movement have successfully infected the church, seeking to destroy the positive image of fatherhood and manhood in general, and the image of the heavenly fatherhood of Yahuwah in particular. If you want to be a truly enlightened and contemporary thinker today, you must not embrace these patriarchal concept of Yahuwah the Father. No, you must view Yahuwah in a more vague and meaningless way. You must view Yahuwah not as a person but as a force, or as a universal principle, or as the ground of all being. This theme has been offered as if it were a revolutionary advance in the theological thinking. It is in fact nothing but an ancient pagan heresy. We see echoes of our own age in the story of Paul's journey to the center of intellectualism, in his day the city of Athens. As he walked around the city, he found evidence of a superstitious, ignorant, and pagan faith everywhere he went. He even found an altar dedicated to an unknown Yahuwah, or an unknown God. Then he went to Mars Hill and gave a speech to the Athenian intelligent elite. He said to them, "What you worship as something unknown, and I am going to proclaim to you that Yahuwah, who made the world and everything in it, is Yahuwah of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hand, and he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. For in him we live and more and have our beings, as some of your own poets have said. We are his offspring." It's mentioned in Acts 17, 23, 25, and 28. Paul is saying, in other words, look, even you as pagans are intelligent enough to know that Yahuwah does not dwell in temples made of stone. How could the creator of the universe be contained by such paltry man-made dwelling place? Even your own Greek poets recognize the fact that Yahuwah is not far from any one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. You already know that much about Yahuwah. Now I'm going to give you the complete biblical revelation so that you will know exactly who Yahuwah is. Primitive faith is the simplest level of faith, and we see such primitive, uninformed, arrogant, or ignorant, searching, groping faith among the intellectual elite of Mars Hill, and with many of today's non-specific, non-organized faiths, such as the New Age movement. Many New Agers believe in a concept they call Yahuwah, but they are apathetic or actively hostile toward faith in Messiah Yahushua. Like the Athenians, they worship an unknown God, and they do so in ignorance. It is the devil's plan to keep such people in their ignorance, always searching and never finding the truth that is right in front of their eyes. We also see primitive, simple faith in the recovery movement founded by alcoholics and anonymous. Many in the recovery movement say Yahuwah's prayer and believe in a higher power, but do not recognize Messiah Yahushua as their higher power. This is not a criticism of those who are in this searching, groping stage. There are many believers or Christians today who first introduced to Yahuwah, our God, our Elohim, was in the form of this vague higher power. As they grew in their understanding and dependence upon Yahuwah for their sobriety, Yahushua gradually revealed himself to them. In time, they became not merely followers of a shadow or higher power, but followers of the risen King and Savior Master Yahushua, Yahuwah himself in the flesh. But there are also many in the recovery movement who never move beyond primitive faith. There are even some who claim a pagan deity, a New Age concept, or some other substitute deity as their higher power. Though the recovery movement has accomplished much good and have saved many people from alcoholism and other destructive habits, the devil will use anything to accomplish his purposes. It is part of his strategy to keep people locked in a primitive faith, never moving on to a more mature faith in Messiah Yahushua. The devil will frequently keep people in their primitive faith by appealing to human pride, planting such ideas in their minds as, "I'm too sophisticated for old-fashioned Bible-thumping organized religion." In other words, I'm too intellectually superior to those ignorant fundamentalists and evangelical who believe that outdated book full of myths and fables. I believe in Elohim Yahweh, but I prefer to imagine my own God. I would rather worship God in a meadow or by a running stream than in a church. In other words, I'm intellectually superior to those poor saps who waste their Sunday mornings in church when they could be sleeping or hiking in the woods. I don't need to read the Bible or go to church to understand Eloah Yahuwah. The Bible can mean anything you want it to, and the churches are just full of hypocrites. In other words, I'm so intellectually superior to anyone else that I can make up any God I want. The devil clearly and cleverly appeals to a human pride and arrogance, duping the intellectual elite into thinking that ancient pagan myths and heresies are really new advances in religion thought. Another scheme the devil employs against us in the realm of the intellect is doubt. The devil plants his heresies and insights, false teachings. False teaching always takes an extreme position, exaggerating one particular aspect of truth and blowing it out of proportion, turning some small piece of Yahuwah truth into an overblown extreme position. The devil even uses this ploy to promote false ideas about himself. He will cause some believer or Christian to become so focused and fanatical about the subject of the devil and demons that they lose their focus on Eloah Yahuwah and his son and his power, Yahushua. To such people, the message of the devil is, yes, I am real, I am the devil. Remember, I am powerful, cunning adversary, so you better focus all your thoughts and energy on defeating me. And those who are lured into this trap run the risk of falling into the clutches and superstitions, occultism, and other excessive, fear-focused practices and beliefs. All of the other extremes, the devil will lead some people, including many church people, to become so intellectually smug that they refuse to believe in the existence of a real personal devil. I have actually met pastors who say, I believe in God, I believe in Yahushua, Christ, Messiah, but I do not believe in the existence of a personal devil. And isn't that a clever ruse on the part of the devil? Isn't concealment the perfect way to trap unsuspecting prey? That's why duck hunters hide in a blind, waiting for the ducks to pass by unaware or of the double-barreled 16-gauge that is waiting to explode in their direction. And this is exactly what the devil does. He hides, he lays in wait and pursues people. That is no such thing as a real personal devil, and that is the perfect setup for an ambush. When humanity is unbelieving and unsuspecting, then the devil is perfectly free to do exactly what he wants among us. Among Christians or believers, the devil will often attack in the realm of the intellect to lead us to be overly obsessed with certain points of theology. There are many Christians who pride themselves on being intense students of the Bible and systematically theology. They have studied all the great theological schools of thought. They have wandered through all the dark woods of theological differences and have climbed the icy peaks of doctrinal fine points such as predestination and dispensationalism and prophecy and the Bible numerics and on and on. Yahuwah never intended that Christians or believers should need a doctrine or divinity or a pocket calculator to understand his word or to live out his plan for their lives. Yahushua said that their faith that saves is a childlike faith, and I believe that the one of the greatest triumphs of Satan has been his strategy of pulling people away from a simple childlike faith and leading them into an endless, pointless dispute over doctrine minutiae. And we're going to stop at this point for right now, and we'll get into section 5 later on.